A lot of attention has been put on booing in Formula One recently due to incidents at the Austin and Mexican Grand Prix. And it's a complicated subject because those for and against booing do make quite convincing points. Whichever way you look at it, the Pandora's box of booing in Formula One is now well and truly open, and it is most probably now here to stay. Over the last few years, we've seen drivers like Hamilton and Verstappen getting booed at particular races, and just recently at the Mexican Grand Prix, we saw Charles Leclerc getting booed by fans in Mexico because he had the gall to be crashed into by Sergio Perez, and the fans did not like that at all. And fair play to him, he addressed it right there in the middle of the post-race interview with Jenson Button. He actually brought it up right there and then that a lot of booing was going on. Even if you're right or wrong, getting booed by thousands of people has got to be very unnerving, and it's got to connect to something primeval in your DNA because it just makes you feel terrible. Unless you're Max Verstappen, who doesn't have DNA because he was built in a top secret motorsport lab somewhere in the Netherlands. Now, unlike in other sports where an entire team might get booed, in Formula One it's an individual driver that is singled out by the crowd, whereas in other team sports like football and rugby, you would have the home side and the away side, and if you get booed by one side, you would most probably get support from the other. It's actually quite rare in other sports where you get an individual player getting singled out by the entire stadium or those in attendance. Booing is a huge topic of debate right now in Formula One, and I think it's well worth looking at the reasons for and against it, and also kind of how it came about in the first place. And also, these are all just my own opinions and thoughts on the whole thing, so please let me know in the comments below, and while you're at it, please make sure you click subscribe. Now, I think we can all agree, since Liberty Media purchased F1 in 2016, and with F1 opening its doors to social media, and Netflix being allowed in to create the Drive to Survive series, F1 has become a very different place. It has attracted millions and millions of new fans, and this has got everyone talking. Pretty much every race weekend is now a sellout, and I don't know about you guys, but I kind of notice a lot more people wearing F1 merch just out and about in the streets. So yeah, people are beginning to follow the sport and kind of follow it a bit more closely and passionately, I guess. And then not to mention the expansion into new markets, particularly the USA, where there's 3 Grand Prix this year. However, with new fans coming on board, this brings new attitudes, new habits, and new beliefs. Now, prior to all this, Bernie Ecclestone kept the F1 door slightly ajar, so it was still accessible, but it was kind of exclusive as well, and it had a kind of mystique about it as well. Now Liberty Media's come along, the door has been kicked well and truly off the hinges, there's no mystique about it anymore, everything is out in the open on social media, and I kind of miss the way it was, to be honest. And all these new fans that have come on board, perhaps their only experience has only been of like football, or if you're in the States, you know, NFL, basketball, hockey or something like that, where you would actually cheer and boo whoever you want, and it's kind of part and parcel, it's kind of custom of the sport. Now, one of the arguments is that potentially some of these new fans aren't aware perhaps of the kind of the etiquettes and customs and what is deemed as correct in the sport. Much like in rugby, when there's a silence whenever there's a penalty or a conversion taken, it's not in the rule book, but it's just kind of what everyone does because it's just part of the customs of the sport. And you may not like the driver that's on the podium, but they have achieved something that you will never ever do, and that deserves a certain amount of respect. You know, booing and jeering is just not the thing to do in Formula One, and I don't think it has any place in it. It's supposed to be a cut above other sports where booing is the norm, hence why tickets are so expensive and why a lot of companies want to be involved in F1 and have their name stamped on the product. The way of the world appears to be in a very selfish place right now, and a lot of people seem to have this attitude of, if it suits me, then it's absolutely fine. And arguably because of social media, people think they can do and say whatever they want all the time, no matter the environment, even if they're at a Grand Prix weekend. Now the thing is, booing is not a new thing in Formula One. I can only talk about what I remember, but there's got to be points from the 90s or 80s or 70s or even earlier where booing and jeering happened, but it just wasn't reported on because that wasn't the done thing. It's just the difference in how it's been covered over the years. Along with the Sky Sports coverage, you have every single person in attendance at a race who has a phone and has access to social media, so any kind of thing will be filmed, uploaded and made public. And recently at the Mexican Grand Prix, there was a fight between a Perez fan and a couple of Ferrari fans, and this sort of thing wouldn't have been reported on, no one would have known about it, but someone was there to film it and upload it to social media. Now, I do wonder if, particularly at podium ceremonies, Sky Production have the crowd all mic'd up, so you should be able to hear whatever the crowd is saying or doing. Now, when there's a big roar from the crowd, you don't really hear it, but if there's booing, you kind of tend to hear it loud and clear, which seems a bit strange. And this can also go vice versa as well. So perhaps maybe there's some shenanigans going on from Sky there, making things bigger or smaller than they actually are. But yeah, in the minds of Sky Sports, controversy creates cash. But the first incidence of booing that I remember is from the 2002 Grand Prix in Austria, where Barrichello let Schumacher by right at the end. And you know, I kind of think fair play to the crowd for booing, because that was a manipulated finish. It wasn't against the rules, but it is just against the spirit of the sport. And yeah, people were making their voices heard and protesting about it. The second incident was Indianapolis in 2005, where only 6 cars started the race due to the other 14 pulling out over safety fears over their Michelin tyres. Again, massively controversial, one of the biggest cock-ups in F1 history, and rightly so. The paying customers, those in attendance, were booing and jeering, but this was directed at Formula One itself rather than the individual drivers. And then it all kind of stopped for a while until 2013, where Sebastian Vettel ignored the multi-2-1 rule, overtook Mark Webber despite the team telling him not to, and winning the race. And again, this is the supporters booing because someone did something that was very, very wrong and against the spirit of the sport. And after this, the floodgates opened, and you would see drivers like Vettel and Hamilton being targeted for booing and jeering because they were, you know, winning all the races, and people were getting bored and tired of this. Kind of like how we're now starting to see with Max Verstappen at certain races. So there's always the possibility that booing has always been there in F1. I mean, you can't say that Alain Prost ever got a good reception in Brazil, for example. There must have been some bad reception from the crowd there at least. Now, the easiest thing is to say that drivers are getting booed because they're winning everything and they're successful. However, now as drivers open up themselves through social media and display their political or social beliefs out there for everyone to see, doing all this will give them strong support, but also very strong opposition at the same time. Take Hamilton and Verstappen. There are people who support them and don't support them because of the racing drivers that they are and how they are on track. And that's totally fine. That's just part and parcel of F1. But what's got a lot stronger over recent years is people liking or disliking a driver, not by what's going on the track, it's just by simply who they are and what they believe and what they put out on social media. And this is where I think the divide between the fans is widening, and generally where the kind of booing is sort of coming from. Now, the general argument for booing in F1 is that you've paid your money, you've got your ticket, it is then your right to do whatever you like. You can boo or cheer whoever you want. The F1 drivers are big boys and multi-millionaires, and who are they going to care if a single person boos them or says something bad to them? It's all part of the fun, and I've paid my money, and who cares what anyone thinks? Now, to a degree, those points are valid. However, when you've got a few thousand people turning up to a race and bringing this attitude of negativity and booing, this can be quite infectious. And then you can probably add an extra 2,000 people onto this who are new fans as well and going, oh, I didn't know you can do this in Formula One, I'm going to do that as well. And then suddenly everyone is doing it. And that's what it all boils down to. People don't get what they want, they don't like what they see, and then they think they can just act accordingly, whether it's simply booing or fighting in the stands like we saw in Mexico. By the way, I'm not saying anything bad about the Mexican Grand Prix or Mexican fans itself, it's just simply the standard thing where a few people ruin it for the majority. But then at the same time, you don't want F1 to have the atmosphere of a library, and you don't want it to have this kind of fake happiness thing of Disneyland. It's trying to find that kind of happy balance in the middle. Like, if I bring my son to a Grand Prix, I don't want to have him exposed to this hostile crowd. If he wants to support Max Verstappen, that's absolutely fine. But if the bloke behind us is shouting and swearing at him every time he drives by, I just don't want to have that kind of atmosphere, and I don't want to have to deal with something like that. But unfortunately, due to the way Liberty Media has been pushing F1 in recent years, I think booing and jeering is now going to be part of the sport moving forward, unfortunately. It's going to be very, very difficult to put a lid back on this now. F1 has always continuously evolved, and perhaps this is just another thing on the path in its continuous evolution. But Liberty have to accept a certain amount of responsibility here, because they've got new fans into the race who are displeased and disappointed when they turn out that an F1 race weekend isn't like what they see on things like Drive to Survive. But if you're at the race and you didn't get the result you wanted, and a driver that you dislike is on the podium, why would you go all the way to the podium just to boo them? That's the most moronic thing I've ever seen. Anyway, I don't think booing or jeering or fighting has any place in F1, and I think the sport needs to do its best to get on top of this and try and squash it pretty quickly. Otherwise, if you let it grow, F1 risks losing its family-friendly atmosphere, and that is something that it relies on race weekends. If you go look at the audience, it is families and friends in attendance. And these are the people F1 needs to try and keep happy, because if they lose the family attendance, they will be really screwed. All that's left will be the new bandwagon fans. They'll be off to the next trendy thing, and then before they know it, F1 will have nothing. Anyway, many thanks for watching. Please be sure to like, share, and subscribe. I'm Paul, and many thanks for watching.